Let me introduce myself, introduce also the co-chair of this session, the co-moderator, my colleague, Dr. Koshima from FAO. I'd like to start with the first question, and that's to the Akisa Bahri. The question would be, there are trade-offs between water, food, human ecosystem health, human and ecosystem health when it comes to policy and decision-making. Your long career path in this policy, science policy, give us some insights on how do we approach these resources in light of their national global priorities. Akisha?
Thank you, Ravi Muhtar, for this invitation to be part of this high-level panel and for this question that is not that straightforward. But I mean, with COVID-19, we have seen that there is a big change that is taking place and that we really need to rethink the way we are dealing with water, food, human, and ecosystem health. And I must say that biodiversity and nature's contribution to people are fundamental to supporting food production, providing clean water, and ensuring good health. And we have seen, the resilience of the agricultural sector during all this period of time. And the way we produce food has an impact on biodiversity and water quality, as well as climate change. The food system is also a major determinant of health, and is the way we manage ecosystems. So the challenge is to achieve good health for all, with food and water security without adversely impacting biodiversity, water quality, or climate, and in the context of global change and such as climate change. So we need to adapt and transform the way we identify, understand, and manage potential trade-offs between these goals at local and national levels. It means that we need to use an integrated approach to water, agriculture, nutrition, and human ecosystems health to address the quadruple challenge globally and locally, because the four goals are deeply interdependent. We need to identify, understand trade-offs, and develop appropriate responses, develop integrated research across SDGs and politically relevant tools to help policymakers with integrated response packages, and build effective and resilient policy systems and programs to enable decision makers to respond to future crises in an informed, timely, and cohesive manner, and in a way that builds credibility and confidence among citizens. As a matter of fact, SDGs are interlinked. Therefore, policy coherence is a target for sustainable development under the responsibility of national governments and relevant ministries. Difference between countries stems from their respective domestic policy-making processes and from trade-offs at national or local levels. Win-win solutions that both conserve biodiversity and promote human well-being are difficult to realize. Progress on one goal may undermine others depending on the responses prioritized, because they each require land, fresh water, and marine resources, among others. So such a nexus approach can capture synergies and manage trade-offs with the alignment of water, food, human and ecosystem health, climate change policy, and interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work. But the way it can be done is through the following 5 points. And as you mentioned, first is a new model of governance for nature-positive water and food systems. This model must be integrative, inclusive, informed, and adaptive to take into account the synergies and trade-offs between societal goals and a plurality of values, diverse economic conditions, inequity, power imbalance, and vested interest in society. But it involves a radical rethink of existing mixes of policy instruments. Second, we need to bring together different actors, government, private sector, civil society, to achieve a shared understanding of how each actor's behavior affects others, and facilitate agreements on rules, rewards, and penalties for action that increase or decrease ecosystem services. Third, we need to invest in infrastructure and increase usage of nature-based solutions and responsive production and consumption for meeting the SDGs in cities. And yesterday, cities were also emphasized, and I think it's more and more important to look at how people are going to be living more, in cities in a different manner. And we need green infrastructure in urban and surrounding rural areas that can complement large-scale gray infrastructure in areas such as flood protection, temperature regulation, cleaning of air and water, treating and reusing wastewater, and the provision of energy, locally sourced food, and the health benefits of interaction with nature. Fourth, we need a better integration of natural and agricultural systems to provide greater sustainability and resilience, redefining food systems as eco-agri-food systems, from ecosystems to farms to intermediaries and processors to retailer and consumers, allows us to work towards increasing nature-positive activities. And finally, we need to create and increase trans-sectoral funding streams which provide significant opportunities to improve global health through agri-environmental investments. So there is a clear need for careful policy choices informed by more detailed understanding of potential trade-offs at appropriate scales and adoption of a dynamic and adaptable approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Akisa. Before I turn the microphone to another question, very briefly, a lot of these trade-offs require tools, data, modeling, predictive analyses. How much of these, as a former agriculture minister, how much of the science is being used in very complex decision-making trade-off analyses? Very briefly.
And this is what is really, this is, I think, the weak points, especially in our countries, where, the relationship between science and policymakers is weak. I have tried to, as a former researcher, I've tried to strengthen this link, but I think that there is really, a need to have more, a much more strong relationship between, and to have, and the funding is also the weak point, in order to have, a much stronger relationship, and that scientists should be, and policymakers should listen, and scientists should be there to be able to respond to the question that, and this is why I said it is also related to funding. So it's really the weak point, and we have to really strengthen this aspect.
Thank you, thank you. The second question is to Tom Williams, the director of the water at the World Business Council. Tom, the current business model for managing these complex relationships has not worked for us. We have pollution, access issues to primary resources, diseases, and so on. Do you see a new business model emerging? And how would that element, what would be the element of that model be?
Thanks, Rabi, and hello, everyone. Great to be part of this panel discussion today. So what we see with the conventional business models is that they are structured around shareholder primacy, which means that for the majority of business, their sole responsibility has been to deliver value in the form of profit to its shareholder. And this has been the backbone of capitalism for decades. And as we know, as you said, Rabi, this approach has contributed to the climate emergency, to nature loss, and the inequality that we see today. So this form of capitalism is not fit for our future. So we need to transform to stakeholder capitalism. So this is where we orientate business models towards the interests of all stakeholders, customers, communities and suppliers, for example. And a big part of this transformation is about how we account beyond finance. How do we account for nature? How do we account for our impacts and dependencies on society? Now, there are significant negative externalities from business where the consequences of business actions are effectively paid for by other stakeholders. If you look at the food system, as an example, it was estimated that there is about $12 trillion of externalities per year, so-called hidden costs, which is actually more than the market value of the food system, which is around $10 trillion a year. And about a quarter of those hidden costs are related to the environment. So as an example of this, if you look at water, you have a company that's polluting freshwater sources. The cost of that pollution is borne by the taxpayer for what is required to fund a pollution control agency or to fund the healthcare system to cure people who are sick from being exposed to polluted water, or a farmer who uses that polluted water for irrigation, and as a consequence, their yields are down by 10%, reducing their income. So those externalities are actually, the cost is picked up by other stakeholders. So we need to have business models that internalize these externalities. And this is a central part of the recommendations that came out of the recently published Dasgupta review, which looked at the economics of biodiversity, where the report states that depleting natural capital is a major constraint for long-term value creation. So if business accounts for natural capital, it's creating value for itself as a business, but also for other stakeholders. Now, whilst there's not many companies that are currently operating with these business models, they had better get moving quickly with initiatives like the Science-Based Targets for Nature and the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. Companies are going to be compelled by investors, by governments, by civil society at large to take action. Now, bringing this back to water, we really need corporates to have a much better understanding of their impacts and dependencies on water. This then needs to be translated into meaningful goals that really drive the right action. Today, we largely see corporate water goals that are about reducing absolute withdrawals or being water efficient. This is not enough. We need targets that account for contextual differences for water, spatial and temporal differences, for example. And we also need to understand how water connects into climate or into biodiversity or into livelihoods. If a company understands the role of water from these perspectives, it can incorporate water into its climate, biodiversity, and livelihood strategies. So this is a really rapidly evolving space, and I expect more and more companies in the years ahead to better reflect the value of water in their governance, business models, and strategies. Very practically, initiatives like the Science-Based Targets for Nature and the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, TNFD, are going to be really critical, and as is the practice of natural capital accounting, which should over the years become mainstreamed. That's it for now, Rabi, back to you.
Thank you. Tom, at the end of the day, these businesses report to investors, and investors really hold the key to some of these. Very briefly, how do we communicate these very, very important issues that you mentioned to investors so that they are fine with these externalities that you mentioned? Because at the end of the day, investors they're looking at their bottom line. They want their investment, return on their investment. How do we communicate? Are we failing in communicating these externalities, the importance of biodiversity you talk about, into the business model that you just described?
Yeah, absolutely. Investors do not currently have a very mature outlook of water risk and opportunities and impacts on corporates. The opportunity we have to educate investors in this space is to use the momentum we see in the climate space. Over the last 5 years, investors have become very sharp at understanding climate-related risks to corporates. We should really look to get on the back of that understanding of investors and climate and make sure that water can be understood in the same context. It's a big effort. It's a big education and outreach effort for investors, but I think we need to build on the existing climate work that investors are doing at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tom. Moving on to the third question to John. John Tracy is the director for the Water Institute in Texas, and he's the interim head of the Biological Agriculture Engineering Department at Texas A&M. John, what is the role of technologies in this transformation to a more sustainable water, food, and health system? Technology plays a big role in these primary resources, and academia holds key in terms of these innovations. So what are these technologies, and what's the role of technology is and should be in this transformation?
Thanks, Rabi, and thanks for having me on this panel. And so one of the things I want to start off with is that I tend to focus a lot more on the practice rather than the policy. So a lot of this is going to not be talking about, how should I say, large-scale policies, talking about including technology and improving the sustainability and resilience of our systems, but rather looking at it when you get to the ground is like, how are we implementing this policy in terms of practice? And so what I want to focus on is sort of some, how should I say, I'll be US-centric on this because we've had 3 events in the last 4 months that have been quite significant, that have been very disruptive of our energy, our food, and our water systems. The first one was the cyber attack on the pipeline on the east coast of the United States that disrupted gas supplies for days. The second one was a cyber attack on a large beef processor that had the same potential, but fortunately didn't seem to disrupt that food system too much. And the third one is what was referred to as the Texas deep freeze, which created a really interesting situation where the entire state of Texas, 30 million people, had rolling blackouts for days on end that eventually led to major disruptions in the most significant water security, incident in Texas in its history. More than any hurricane, more than any drought, it wasn't even close. We ended up having, at one point, over 15 million people without an adequate supply of water on days on end, which in some parts of the world, maybe that's just sort of what they're working through to get to more security. But in a developed country, again, it was pretty unprecedented. And so these types of events are happening all over the world. And when you really look at them and you sort of ask this question, where does technology fit into this? I think there's two things that need to come out and of these events and really realize our discussion and discussing the nexus and discussing how technology is going to address it. The first one is we talk about the nexus and we talk about how food, energy, and water are related, but we really don't get into what I think the most important discussion is understanding the cross-correlation between our investments in infrastructure and how it leads to sustainability and security of these foods. And so when we look at it, food, water, and energy are three very important infrastructure elements. But what we're leaving out is health and communications and information technology systems. And it is critical to understand these cross correlations because when you start looking at it and say, what was the huge disruption? What infrastructure failed that led to this huge disruption of our fuel systems on the East Coast of the United States? It wasn't an energy technology issue. It wasn't water. It wasn't food. It was information technology. The same can be said for the cyber attack on the beef processing. And when you start looking at, again, the largest water crisis the United States has faced in the last 50 years, it was not only the energy system that failed, it was actually a huge element of the communication and IT systems that failed. And when we address these, we're not really talking about what are we going to invest in to make our we talk about what are we going to invest in terms of technology to make our water system safe. But oftentimes we say, well, what water technology invest in? And the reality is that's probably the least return on investment there. That is, if we focused on communication and information technology investment, that will probably lead to better improvements in our water security and water sustainability. And when we get into these discussions, we look at increasing the security or sustainability of a particular infrastructure and think we need to invest in that infrastructure. And we don't stop and understand that there are correlations between all of these infrastructures. And we really need to do an assessment of where is it smartest to invest in. The other thing that we need to understand is that there is this tendency to go to higher and better levels of technology. And I think we kind of need to get out of this mindset. And this came up from a discussion I had one time where somebody asked a very simple question. Why do we have traps in toilets and sinks and centralized wastewater treatment supplies? And I looked at him, I said, well, to keep the smells of the sewer out of our houses. And they looked at me and I explained the whole situation. And it is one of the most simple, elegant solutions to dealing with a problem. It is a very low-tech, highly effective solution to a problem that if you're connected to a centralized wastewater treatment collection, that you deal with an odor problem that would be pretty noxious. And when we start looking at our engineered or technology solutions, we tend to move towards higher and higher tech solutions and not stopping and thinking about, well, what's the simple solution here? And when we start talking about information technology, what this leads me to believe is we start thinking we need a bunch of computer scientists to write better cybersecurity code. And the answer may be, no, we need better social training so people understand the security risks. And so this is something else that I think we really need to focus on is this cross-correlation, not just between the critical infrastructure, but also making sure we include an understanding of how our human, social, and governance systems are interacting with this technology to be able to create better and more sustainable and more secure water, food, and energy systems. So the bottom line there is that I do see a primary role of technology being focused on better communication and information systems, but not in the context of having computer scientists develop those, but in the context of sort of having a more social and technological integrated approach to this. So we're not developing systems that basically fail because humans don't understand how that they need to use these systems. So that's where I tend to go and say, what is the future of technology? We need to realize humans are part of the technology and that we need to understand that when we want to improve the security and sustainability of the individual systems, we may have to look to other infrastructure as where we need to invest and not simply focus on coming up with a better water treatment technology or coming up with a better well pumpage technology, rather thinking about it in the broader term of what are all these cross correlations and understanding the most effective investment to meet the end goal for a particular resource.
Thank you, John. I really like you bringing in the social element, the human element to this, and we see it in many dimensions in technology. In particular, the work we trying to do in terms of water reuse, the social acceptance to wastewater reuse in many parts of the world is lagging behind because of the lack of trust in technology that it will do, but also in the consumption behavior, in the way we deal with, I mean, we were talking yesterday about waste. A lot of the waste reduction is a social behavior issues. And those are very complex issues. So thank you for bringing this up. We will come back to this aspect because I hope we'll pick it up in the Q&A. That's a very important element in the whole aspect that we tend to miss. So this human factors. So thank you, John. I'm gonna, I think Tom will be joining us, I hope later soon. I'm gonna move into Steve Mosher. Steve is a Deputy Center Director and Scientific Operation at the Food and Drug Administration. Steve, the question to you is, governance has been identified as one major challenge for the sectors we're talking about, the water, the energy, the food, the health, and others, let alone that these are interacting sectors. So how do we achieve coherence? Akisa mentioned earlier in her reply to the questions about the coherence in these policies and decision-making across those sectors. So how do we come close to achieving this coherence in the policy across all of this sector? Because each sector is a system. And then when you look at those cross-sectoral issues, policy coherence becomes really a challenge. Can you give us some insights there, please?
Well, thanks, Robbie. And I can give you some insights, but I don't think I can solve the problem. So let's just set aside coherence for a minute and talk about what the underlying principles are and what we would need to have consistent policies across various sectors and groups. And the underlying issue, at least in terms of what we've been dealing with over the last several years, is what do we do with the science and the data? Because that's what really forms the basis of the policy and the decision making. And moreover, not only how do we use that data, but how do we share that data in a global economy in a One Health approach? So the data itself, it's a critical aspect of making all of these decisions and having related discussions. So unless we can agree on how to compare the data, if the data is not standardized in some way, it becomes very difficult for us to have groups of people meet and say, we think this particular area is more polluted than another particular area, if we're really not comparing the data in a way that makes sense. And we haven't been able to look at it in some kind of risk assessment manner to say, well, do we really understand the underlying principles here? Do the data themselves support what we're trying to do? Are our interventions being effective? Because if we're not making measurements that are consistent and have quality across the various structures that we're trying to measure, then it just becomes a meaningless jumble of information that no one can really use. And it also often highlights countries and organizations that don't have sophisticated infrastructure for making these measurements or for obtaining the data. So they're often disadvantaged. And so, I think one of the things and one of the obvious places to start is how do we get to a place where we're developing good data and sharing that data amongst countries and individuals that have a stake in this broad area. Now, I'll just say that obviously individual scientists and countries own their own data. So this isn't some, you have to share everything, but there's got to be a place to do that. But when those kinds of projects and cross-country programs, and we're trying to make decisions in a global economy, there needs to be less of a governance structure, I would say, and more of a platform for the partners to meet. So, some of those things are, how do we set the standards? How do we develop the protocols? How do we share the data in a way that's safe? Some of this data is not something that people are comfortable sharing in a public, maybe in a public platform, but how would we do that in a way that partners involved in the decision-making have access to it? And most importantly, as I said, we want everyone to be collecting the same data. And I'll just give you a brief recent issue we had where we were having data come in from various states, and it turned out they were all collecting water in a different way. Some people were collecting 100 milliliters, some people were collecting a liter, others were filtering through 40 liters, some people were collecting 100 liters of water in a single sample. And since there was no standardization, the data was completely meaningless. We had almost no way to draw all of that information together and make sense out of it. So, one of the takeaways for us was you have to have a very standardized approach to collecting and using the data if you're going to try and make policy decisions based on that information and that science. And it's critical, and it really helps understand those integrated systems, Robbie, that you talked about, like how do they all fit together? Well, you got to design data collection and data sharing from the ground up, because it's just not very informative if you don't. That being said, I think there's a lot of room for some of the existing organizations to help fill this role. For example, we're working with FAO right now to help with one of our programs, and they're doing a great job of providing this forum and this platform for the various collaborators to work and share information. There's others, there's WHO, there's organizations like the one that's sponsoring this meeting. But really what we're trying to do is find a way of bringing people together and discussing how we're going to do this information sharing, how we're going to do the experiments, how we're going to provide the data in a way that's meaningful and useful for the policymakers, because it's difficult enough making the policy, but it's even harder if the data is not consistent across platforms and we don't really know what we're doing there. So I think if we really want to understand how one system is interacting with another, we have to start with the underlying data and science that supports that answering that question. And I'll stop with that for now.
Thank you so much, Steve. Following up on the important aspect that you mentioned on the data, I know, for example, in the US, a lot of these projects, a lot of these activity are public because of the funding that brought in this knowledge is public, and many of the agencies actually have an open data policy. Yes. But if you look at the complex system that we're talking about, it's a global issue. I mean, the food supply chain is global. Health pandemic that we were living in today is global. Certainly the water is a global factor with trade and many of other transport processes. So getting to this global aspect, and we know that not every country has the same laws and regulations in terms of the data and availability of data, making it public. How do we move to a place where data sharing becomes a practice that is enforced, or for a kind of a lack of a better word, monitored, that all of the publicly funded projects, was most of the projects that we look at are publicly funded, can share that platform? And do we have examples that you can share about this platform that allow us to really, at a global scale, share this kind of data that you're mentioning?
Really, well, that certainly strikes to the heart of the problem, Robbie. You see, in the US, as you said, we are required to share the data and make it public. And I have to admit that when we first did this, and we've had a number of projects now where we've been doing global pathogen sharing, data sharing for now almost a decade. We've deposited nearly 1 million sequences, whole genome sequences of pathogens into a public data sharing through collaborations both within the US and outside the US. And I would say the single biggest hurdle that has to be overcome is trust. Trust and agreement on the associated data. So you can have a sequence of some organism, for example, and then the metadata that goes along with it. So if I provided, for example, the GPS coordinates where that sample was taken, that might cause real problems for a particular business or a country. And so if the metadata was higher up and said, well, we got that from the United States, that still provides useful information on what the pathogen loads are or the types of pathogens are there. But it doesn't provide the kind of information that would impact trade or be so problematic. So when people get integrated into these types of systems where they become used to sharing data, they gain a lot of trust in the system, and they understand that it doesn't provide the kind of horrible impact that they may have anticipated. And so there's got to be, as I said, there have to be these forums and these platforms for people to meet and say, I'd like to discuss this. It's really not uncommon for us to have meetings with countries for years before they get comfortable to put data into a public repository. And that's okay, as long as we're moving towards a more of a data sharing practice. And then there are other ways to share data. So for example, if it's related to human, where it can be tied to a particular human protected information, there's ways to wall off that data as well. But it just really means people have to sit down and agree that they're going to do this. And once we do that, then we can start moving forward with how do you share it? What does it mean? What exactly are we going to share? What's important for making decisions? As you might imagine, you could have giant data sets with lots and lots of information, but the policymakers may only need a piece of that, or they may need a synthesized piece of that. So that's why I'm saying it's really, really important to have these discussions ahead of time and bring people in, get them involved early, be patient and say, look, here's how this works, show them how it works. And generally, then you can have success. Not always, but it does seem to work.
Thank you so much, Steve. I'd like to, Sasha, would you please help me out in the Q&A? I think we have a lot of great points that was raised by all of the speakers. I don't see Q&A. I don't see the questions yet, but they will be coming in. So please do, if you're attending, if you're listening to this very interesting insights, please put in your Q&A right there. So Sasha.
Thank you very much, Robbie, and thank you to all the panelists for great intervention. I see a question relating to what is the role of global water community towards achieving sustainable water, food, and health for all. Would any of you like to take up that question? What is the role of the global water community towards achieving sustainable water, food, and health for all from your respective standpoints in your work sphere?
Well, Sasha, maybe I can come in there
Sure.
and maybe first make a statement that probably many will be familiar with, but the water, I mean, it's not even the water sector, but those engaged in water research, practice, and policy are very good at speaking to each other. We're very good at convening at these kinds of events like IWRA, but when it comes to engaging in those sectors where water really makes a difference, health, energy, food, we don't often show up. So as a water community, we really need to engage in those other sectors, whether it's professional bodies, whether it's conferences. This may not go down well with the organizers, but we probably have too many water conferences. How can we actually mobilize the membership of IWRA, for example, to have an effective intervention in a health conference, in an energy conference? We stick to our water community far too much, and I think we really need to be adventurous and get out there and get our message across to all these different important sectors.
Anyone else? Akisa, would you like to address that question?
Yeah, I think that first of all, the SDGs and COVID-19 it is pushing us to go out of what Tom was saying. That's true, that water people usually talk to water people. But nowadays, I mean, we have to change completely the way we do our business, and we need to really connect to other. And it is clear that we are working in silos, and we have to break these silos and to bring in to get, I mean, more, I mean, the water, the food, the health, the energy, and so on, and different disciplines. This is why I was talking about transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary. It is more complex because we are more, and the way even, I mean, funders are organized, ministries are organized, policies are organized. This is why I was thinking that we need to rethink completely that we are doing our business. So it is pushing us to real frontiers where we need to really, I mean, it is a real revolution that has to take place. But I mean, COVID is pushing us. SDGs were there, and how to work more, I mean, together more, I mean, in a more coherent and so on. But COVID-19 is really putting us under, I mean, different responsibilities. And I see how we are, I mean, putting together the different, I mean, SDGs, the different goals together. It is a challenge, but we have to take it on. I mean, so this is where, I mean, the global community, I mean, the water and the overall community has to take on this challenge. So it is a very interesting period of time, I think, but also very challenging at the same time. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. And as we are transforming this food systems approach through this year's Food System Summit, we're looking at a lot of these innovations. I mean, where does innovation should take place? Is it in new institutions, or is it in in policy? Is it who should do what, right? Where are the roles? So it's very complex. But if you'd like to further address that, that'd be great.
I think we have to work. This is why on governance issues, on technologies, as it was said, on data, all the things that we have been talking about, we need to address them. And so, I mean, there is no field that can be left out of there. I mean, out. We really, this is why, I mean, that we have to organize and to see. This is why I think governance is one of the things I would think of first, but also all the linkages between different, I mean, the different actors and building trust. This is also something that was also mentioned. I mean, confidence and trust, that is very important in order to bring people together on multi-stakeholders platforms where we need to discuss and to make change happen.
And we have another question on equity and social justice, as these are essential for achieving SDG target. With the lack of access to across and within nations to these primary resources, how do we ensure that we meet these equity targets? Would anyone like to take that one up?
There is one
John?
part we didn't say anything about women, but I think that also women and youth is very important, and that we need to pay attention because they have a very important role to play on food and water and so on.
This is also another one of our thematics for this conference. John, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, so the issue of equity and social justice, I think, gets underlain by this discussion of exactly how do we view water in sort of our economic systems is the only way I could phrase it. And it's been interesting, and I've been in a variety of conferences talking about global water shortages and things of that element. And what I always try to pose to people is ask the questions like, do you think water should be a commodity, or do you think it should be a resource available to all persons? And this gets to the heart of SDG 6, but also gets to the heart of how the scientific community views water. And this, gets into the heart of how we look at water governance. And in the United States, our water laws, and in other countries, their water policies. And I think it's sort of one of these questions that when we start setting our agenda, and whether we're talking about an agenda for understanding, sort of, how should I say, more equitable access to social systems, or setting a scientific agenda for understanding availability of water resources, or developing technology to make water safer and more available, we kind of avoid, I think, which is a critically important question, is, is water something that corporations should be able to make lots of money off of, or is it something that is such a basic human resource that you take it out of that realm? And this is always a struggle we've been having in terms of the goals of water. And we see this, for example, in Texas right now. We are pushing water utilities to say, your goal should be equitable access, not making profits. And then there's this pushback, of no. The capitalistic system works and we should treat water like a commodity. And I think there's some events that have happened recently that have really exposed the flaw of assuming that treating water as a marketable good in a capitalistic system will raise all boats. What it does is it creates more inequity across social systems, and it drives higher and higher levels of people to, have less access to safe, secure water supplies. And this is where it ties into the research community that I do get very frustrated with, is that we end up doing a lot of research, technological research, talking about water reuse, talking about desalination. All of these technologies are very expensive. And by creating that expense, we're basically driving further levels of inequity unless you create a system where these technologies are implemented. You do not require, equal compensation for all accessing the water supplies. And so that's another example where if we're going to go down the line of using these technologies, we better go down the line of understanding how water governance systems at the local or more regional levels are adopted, so that you don't create a system where you make water so expensive, you just sort of cut out 10, 15% of the population from ever being able to afford it, getting their water supply shut off, and then they have to go into a system where they're water insecure for the rest of their lives. And so that's where I kind of look at this, is that we avoid this discussion of should water be worked under a capitalistic marketable system, or it's just a social good and you have to treat it as such. And so when we do implement higher levels of more expensive technology, hey, the wealthier people pay, that's the way it is. Let's move on from that discussion and not get involved in it anymore. And I can tell you from the scientific research perspective, I get very frustrated with researchers say, I have a solution. It's like, your solution just cut another 2% of the people out of the water supply. Think about it in those terms. Should our goal be having water as a profit, or should our goal be nobody goes without water? And I know the UN and Sustainable Goal 6 is very clear on this, and I agree with it. But I think in terms of some of the implementation, especially in more developed countries, we kind of sort of slide by that question and don't really address it at all the levels it needs to be addressed, not just at the social and governments, but in terms of how we set research agendas, how we set technology development, and the types of regulation and constraints we put on private companies that are trying to make a profit off of water.
Thank you very much, John, for that insight. And also from the agriculture perspective, we're trying to make water also more efficient to allow for other equitable uses. And some of the technologies implemented now is looking at evapotranspiration through, almost real-time remote sensing informatics on biomass, the weather patterns and models to ensure that agriculture meets the most efficient consumption of water to release it to the other sectoral uses. So I wanted to put the agriculture use of water there. I think you've referred to many of the domestic water use and potentially in this industry, but agriculture in the global arena absorbs about, withdraws 70% of freshwater resources. Okay, I see Gerda Verberg is here with us. Big welcome to you, and thank you very much for your press time and availability to join us. We have a question for you, and that relates to the pandemic. How did the pandemic change the dynamics between the water, food, and health sectors through your work in policy arena, and any others that you would like to address?
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Gerda Verberg. I'm from the Scaling Up Nutrition movement, and this movement is owned by 64 member countries, where the government has committed to end all forms of malnutrition by taking a multi-sectoral approach and by working with the different stakeholders in their countries. Now, that's easier said than done, and the COVID crisis has indeed made this crystal clear. that systems at country level are very vulnerable, and especially the connection health, food, sanitation, and water. A water supply. And I just joined when John Tracy was talking. And John, I fully agree with you. I don't know who has proposed to privatize water or make it a market instrument, but let's never go there, because indeed it will create more poverty and it will create more debts. It is a social good, and it is a right, a human's right, I would say. Why have I said yes to this invite? Because it's not my key and core business, but when you are talking about nutrition, you are very aware of the need for clear water that is accessible and affordable, that is provided by you, because the many million deaths that are there already, starting with little children, are very often also caused by water that is not reliable, that is unsafe, that is polluted, and that is not serving people's health. But I'm also here because I want to make water more, no, it's not me to make, but I would like to invite all participants here to be more vocal and more visible in the Food System Summit. As Sasha already said, agriculture and food production requires a lot of water, fresh water, and the first need of human beings is water. I mean, the second one is you can live longer or maintain the quality of life longer without food rather than without water. But we are very much involved in the Food System Summit, and so far the voice of water could be raised a little bit, get a little bit more volume. Not to stay in your own kennels or your own silo, but to make clear how important healthy, fresh, available and affordable water is to really change our food system for the better, for people as well as for our planet. And this is my answer. And given the fact that we are learning from the COVID crisis, we have been able to bring into the urgency room of the government, together with health, also the nutrition. And within the nutrition, in some countries, also the water and sanitation item. But I have to admit, the importance of water is not everywhere recognized enough. And that is why it is a pleasure and an honor to join this event.
Thank you very much, Gerda. And in the chat box has the bio of Gerda Verburg, the UN Assistant Secretary General and the Sun Movement Coordinator. And thank you again for your insightful and analysis and wisdom, and your hard promotion on nutrition, and also the intersect between nutrition and water, which was stated in the opening segment of this conference. But I agree with you that it is a very important topic, and water needs to be further advanced in the Food System Summit. As there are many, many dimensions of it, but the water stakeholders and the water community needs to come together to recognize that water and its food and food security and nutritional interlinkages, as well as the environment and biodiversity that has been mentioned in others. Now.
Sasha, do we have an interaction here, or are you leading and asking questions, or are we able?
Oh, yes, we can interact, please, by all means.
Yeah, because I would like to invite all participants here to look in their own country where it stands with the national or the country-based food systems dialogues, and making sure that they are at the table to represent the importance of water there, and to see where water can fit and contribute to improved food systems. And accessibility and affordability is one issue. I would also like to make the strong plea because farmers need to be part and parcel of improved food systems, but farmers do not always get a fair price. My suggestion is to also look strongly at paying, rewarding, recognizing and rewarding farmers for their nature stewardship, including water, keeping the water clean or the water floating or whatever. The ecosystem services should really include water sources and the role that many farmers are happy to play and are very able to play if they are recognized and paid for it. And let us make a strong plea for redirecting the 600 billion American dollars per year that are going to subsidies, food-related subsidies, and let us redirect them. Let's not cut them. Let us redirect them to the behavior we want to see in order to create better food systems for people and for the planet, including our water sources.
Excellent remarks. And are there any other comments from the panelists? I'd like to ask first in reaction to Gera's intervention.
Maybe Sasha, I could come in and maybe just sort of very quickly relate a story from a couple of years ago when I visited some farmers here in India, so in Maharashtra, and really seeing how they were using water. And I visited one particular farmer who was piping water from about 3 kilometers away from another field he had, from a borehole. Now, he didn't pay for that water, it was free. The energy required to pump that water was subsidized by the government. What he didn't know is that the groundwater level is depleting quite rapidly in that area. So I asked him the question of, had he considered having a rainwater harvesting pond on his land to collect and use water? He said, yes, I have considered that, but that's going to take up land where I could be sowing my crops and get a good yield and maintain my income. Now, if I was that same farmer who had the same subsidies that he got, who had the same data and information that he got, I would probably make the same decision. And I think it just goes to the point of around data availability and sharing, recognizing the value of water and redirecting some of these subsidies. Farmers are really under pressure in many countries from a harvest to harvest sort of context. And that's the time frame that they're thinking in. If we can educate them, work with them, redirect subsidies so they really appreciate the value of water, I think that's a really good start for us to make them water stewards.
Thank you, Tom, for that very important information. Akisa?
Yes, I wanted to say that this question of subsidies is really crucial. First of all, I would like to stress the importance that is not, with the problem with the climate change and now health, water is always being, when it is central to the economy, and it is, when we talk about climate change, it's all about water. When we talk about health, we see also all the relationship with water. So water has not yet taken, the place it requires and the attention it requires. And I hope that, as Gerda was saying, that at the food summit, we have to push and to make sure that it will be recognized as it should. But this question of subsidies is really very, very important, because the subsidies are not going where they should be going. And that is this question of recognizing the role of, for example, agriculture, the role that, payment for ecosystem services and so on is really important. And in our countries, I see that without all the degradation, coming from an arid to semi-arid region, all the problem of degradation, the role that agriculture has been doing for centuries, the work that have been doing for centuries is not recognized. And it has so many values, so many, it is serving so many things like tourism and so on, and we are not enough paying attention. So we have to really provide, the right place and recognize these values and pay for them, because it is very important. And when we talk about equity, it's also related to all these small scale farmers that are doing, having a very important role that is really not recognized. So subsidies need to be diverted and to where they should go. It's very important, and I would like to thank Gerda for raising this point.
Thank you very much. The redirecting subsidies for better behaviors and outcomes is really important. Maybe this is something we can raise to discuss among the G20 ministers and beyond in looking at some of these issues, since water has been raised among the members of the G20 as a high agenda item. But they can definitely take it further to look at the role of subsidies in water to intersect for better overall natural resource management.
So Sharon, if you allow me, I would like to make the case why I want to make the plea for redirection. I've been a Minister of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality myself in the Netherlands, and I know as soon as you touch subsidies, everybody is extremely alert. And then the lobbyists are out to make the case to change nothing. But if you are making the narrative to redirect them and to reward farmers who are really contributing to a better nature, nicer landscape, the reuse of water, there is much more traction, and you can tell the narrative and you get more and more support. Because trust me, farmers are polluting, are creating a lot of greenhouse gases, but they want desperately to be part of the solution and recognized for it, and not blamed for what they are doing.
That's definitely the key, and it's very important. In that thought, I was wondering if you have any additional thoughts in relation to legal instruments. For example, the US right now, through one of the congresswomen from Maine, is proposing a new regulation on resilient agriculture, and is putting through the Congress. And that encapsulates a lot of the carbon, soil, the water, and farmers' productivity lens. As a policymaker, as a minister in the past, what are other instruments that you think could be proposed besides economic subsidies?
Yeah, the most important is start with incentives. Don't start with taxes, don't start with regulations, because farmers and food producers are no bookkeepers, are not accountants, and they hate bureaucracy. Secondly, also have as a counter proposal also the stick ready. So work with a carrot and a stick, but give the people of goodwill the opportunity to first change their focus, and then put the spotlights on them to name and fame them. Because a good example always is much more inspiring, rather than bad examples and stories, negative stories, etc. Though in the news you might be confronted with many negative stories, but the good stories are told further, and farmers are more happy. Besides having been a minister myself, I was also a farmer's daughter, born and raised on a dairy farm. And my parents taught us, be good for the animals, be good for the land and water, and then they will take good care of us and pay us back, reward us for our good treatment as well. And this is still the case. Interview farmers and other water users. They want to be at the good part of the contribution. And I cannot criticize, or I cannot reflect on what is proposed in the USA, because every country has its own political sensitivities and its own goals. But one thing is for sure, we need to do something about water, because it's one of the sources that we need most to create a prosperous future for all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Would any other panelists like to speak to that? Robbie?
I'd like to come back to the equity issue, because I don't think we spend enough time there. John, introduce the kind of the topic in which equity versus profit as a kind of a reference, and I go back to Gerda's point about the free access, which I agree with, and John agreed with as well. In Texas, as an example, there are more than 500 water utilities, probably more utilities in the state of Texas than you exist in many other countries as a whole. Most of these are private utilities companies. So the question about equity is not as simple as it appears from a distance. I'd like maybe panelists to comment on this, because it's not a straightforward issue, at least from our experience in the US. Many of these companies do have shareholders that they have to report back to. So it's not a trivial issue. So maybe we can have the panelists shed some light on their own experience. I know that there are from across the spectrum, from all the way to free access to water, which we all love to have. Again, some of the private companies in water utilities do not have that luxury. So whoever have some insight on this, maybe it's good to highlight, because it is an important element achieving the SDGs within the governance structure of water that we have. John?
So, Robbie, I want to add one correction. You missed by an order of magnitude. There's over 6,000 municipal water utility or municipal water providers in the state of Texas, and they exist under a really wild mixture of the vast majority are not-for-profit corporations that are tied to municipalities who are there to just recover costs for the water they provide. However, there is a significant number that are for-profit. They're actually called water supply corporations, and that they are supposed to turn a profit. And while they don't exactly have shareholders, they do have people that expect a return on the money. And then there's there's other ones that are behind the scene of water utilities that are actually trying to make a profit selling raw water to water utilities. And so Texas is kind of like this really wild mixture of some that are there for the social good, some that are there for making a profit, and sort of everything between. So it's one of the reasons that Texas is so fascinating in looking at this access to water, because it is all over the map. And it does provide many, many, many different examples of actually being able to look at different types of governance, different kinds of economic constructs, and then actually look at outcomes, both in terms of access to water, but also linking them to understanding, well, if you have particular communities or areas that have high levels of water disconnects, in essence, they purvey their household water by going to, a place to fill up a 5-gallon jug, looking at the linkages to the food deserts that may exist in these same areas, and also negative health outcomes. And that's something that's becoming really interesting, because we all know that lack of access to water leads to poorer health outcomes. But it's also interesting that there's some level of tie-in to these, lack of access to healthy foods. And what's also becoming clearer is, tying it back into another critical infrastructure, is that they tend to have lack of access to, in the US, high-speed internet. And so it's just interesting that it's no surprise that these economically disadvantaged areas don't have access to this, but the correlations are becoming very stark. And you have to ask the question, what's driving, all of this, other than it's economically disadvantaged? And what we're seeing is this lack of equity, this lack of access, this lack of understanding, access to water as a social good is really driving, this sort of cycle that people get into, where they, lose access to water. Then it becomes both more time consuming and more expensive to get water, which makes it harder to get adequate healthcare, which makes it harder to get good food supplies, and so forth and so on. And I don't know whether it starts with water or it starts someplace else, but it's very clear that an unequitable access to water really exacerbates this downward spiral into, in essence, disconnecting from society and getting into a situation you're never going to get out of.
Thank you. I like to actually pose this question also to Tom. Access to water, FAO will have a session specifically on water tenure tomorrow, and explore some further the the OECD multi-level governance structure on water governance. It really goes into the further thinking on access to both water and land, forestry, and all the natural resources, encapsulating the access to land and water tenure. In that construct, what is the private sector's role in access to water through land tenure agreements as well? If you have any reflections on that.
Yeah, thank you, Sasha. Maybe I'll start with the human right to water and then sort of move over to sort of broader rights to water. Many people know that the human right to water and sanitation came into effect in 2010, and many countries have incorporated this into their legislations. What many people don't understand is that there's multiple dimensions of the human right to water and sanitation to do with accessibility, availability, but also affordability, recognizing that there is a price to pay for water, because we all know that it costs to collect water, to treat it, to distribute it, for example. The challenge that many public and private utilities have globally, as John mentioned, is that they are really struggling to balance their books because the tariffs are set so low that they can just about recover their costs. So we do need a much more sophisticated way that we can set tariffs for drinking water, which enable those who can't afford it to have government subsidies or other schemes that enable them to afford it. And we also need to change our mindset around the human right to water and sanitation. Unfortunately, we generally see it as aspirational, which is incredible because it should be a very basic human right. But the fact is that billions of people don't have access to water and sanitation around the world. We've got such a long way to go to make this a basic human right to be realized. And to be more aspirational, we can then talk about water value and how we value water based on its economic function, its environmental function, and its social function. And I think that pushes us into a broader discussion around water tenure and land tenure and water rights, for example. There's not many places that have established water rights or water markets. Australia, some places in the US, for example, and they're quite mixed results. Probably the best place to look is the Murray-Darling Basin. And it's quite timely because in the last couple of years, there's been so much research coming out of that, looking at the effectiveness of that water rights platform. I wouldn't necessarily say that water markets have failed. I think they are a good solution in the right place if they are structured appropriately and there's a level playing field. They might not be appropriate for all locations, but I think they're one of a number of different instruments and tools we should be utilizing to ensure that water is allocated to its most effective function and use.
Thank you. We would very much like to have you at the session tomorrow for these interventions. Akisa.
Yes, I would like to intervene on this question of equity or equality and human rights, because and to bring more the country perspective, because coming from a country, as I said, arid to semi-arid, with problems of water quantity and quality. And this makes also the question a little bit more difficult, because human right, the access to water is recognized. The right to water is recognized in our constitution. In our water law is right to water and sanitation. So, but at the same time, there are differences between rural and urban areas for drinking water, and differences between, of course, drinking water and agricultural water. But I would like to stress first this difference between urban and rural areas, where there are especially this question of water quality that brings question of the informal and formal not market, but they are, because of the water quality, sometimes people are not pleased with. We have a kind of informal market that is happening. It's not the same as the ones that Tom were referring to in Australia and so on, but is taking place. And this is also something that from the point of governance that we have to take into account and to look at what is happening from these different sources. We have, a water company that is providing a very good service all across the country, and we have also what we call the Water Users Association that are providing water for drinking purposes and for agriculture purposes. But because of this different kind of service that is being provided, I mean, there are different forms that are an informal aspect that are being developed. And this creates this question of difference, and people in rural areas that have the feeling that they have not the same kind of service because of, you know, and that we need to address and to find from the point of governance what is the best actually, and we have been looking in the water law for different kinds of looking for different kinds of governance to be able to better serve people in the rural areas, in the urban areas. I mean, no problem from this point of view, and we have desalination, water treatment plant, and so on that are taking place. But as I said, the rural areas have, I mean, there's still a lack, I mean, a need to pay more attention to what is happening, especially from the drinking purposes, from the point of view of agriculture purposes, and people are paying for water. Would it be in urban for agriculture purposes or drinking? So it's indeed, water is a social good, but we have to pay for the service. And it's something that has been accepted. And it's important to keep in mind, I mean, this principle in cities, there are gradual, I mean, tariffs depending on the water that is being consumed. In rural areas is different, but I mean, so I want to, as I said, to stress this question of governance, trying to bring people on the same ground, would it be in rural or urban areas, and we need still to work on these aspects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Akisa. Very difficult and complex situations. And Robbie, I'm going to hand it over to you to wrap up.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you for the very insightful comments from the panelists. Before we wrap up, I'd like maybe to give the chance back to the panelists for a 1-minute final word that summarizes some of the discussion or their key messages that they'd like the audience to hear. We'll start with Akisa. 1 minute, please.
I mean, I would like to stress again this need of the need to work across borders, and to find ways of bringing together, I mean, the different ministries, and this needs maybe at the level of the government to have also, there is a need for another kind of work that needs to be done, where people are going to work more together, and also at the level of the developing partners. So I think that is important in order to bring together the different sectors. And COVID has shown again that nature-based solutions are very important, and that we need, from the point of view of consumption, production and consumption, we need to change, I mean, the way we are dealing with water, food, health, and so on. So this is, I think, it's important to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Akisa. Tom Williams, 1 minute, wrap up your key words that you'd like the audience to hear.
Great, Rabbi. Maybe 3 things following on from what Akisa said. Engage with other sector dialogues. You know, there's a big call from Gerda to engage in the Food Systems Summit, which is coming up in September. Unique opportunity to make sure the voice of water is heard. So do heed that call and engage with the food sector, with the energy sector, with the health sector, for example. Data, you know, is really critical, but the conversation we have on data is more important than the data itself. You know, COVID has taught us that having data is one thing, but how you use that to inform policy, behavioral change is quite another. You know, all countries have had access to this COVID data about cases, deaths, but they've all made very different decisions and taken different paths based on, you know, very similar data. So educating people about data, how to use it, how to talk about data is actually more critical than the data itself. And then thirdly, on technology, I was really pleased to hear the comments that we need to have a much broader perspective of technological innovation. So don't just look at water. I still feel in the water sector that 90% of the innovation is only focused on 10% of the problem. You know, we need to find other ways that we can bring water into other innovation realms, and other ways that we can incentivize the right kind of innovation to really hit the problems that we need to solve.
Thank you, Tom. John, what would you like to leave the audience?
Well, I'd like to say, well, ditto to what Tom just said. He just kind of captured a lot of what I was going to focus on. But I think, re-emphasizing this point is that we tend to get into a system where we're looking for more advanced technological solutions, whether we're talking about advanced, water treatment technologies, improved, sort of energy efficiency, or what Tom was focusing on was the data. And I think that we really need to start thinking, let's move more towards what I call elegantly simple solutions that do integrate these critical infrastructures. And in particular, I think it's going to be very important to understand the importance of not just the data, but the communication and information, to make sure that when we're utilizing some level of advanced technology, we have effective mechanisms to both have consistency in how we're looking at data, but also the critical people that are going to be operating these systems or making policy decisions have some level of understanding of how to communicate across, communicate how the technology should be used, and just making sure that we're implementing information and communication systems that will actually work in the water, food, and energy space.
Thank you, John. Steve, your turn for your last 1 minute message.
Thanks first to everyone. It was really great hearing everyone's perspective. I would just like to say, I think it's really important for us to first describe what problem we're trying to solve, and not just a general problem like water quality, but what specific problem in what specific area, and then take a systems approach to trying to address it. And I'll tell you how that works. If you just tell innovators to go, come up with a new cool way of developing fresh water from desalinized water, they're going to come up with lots of different solutions. And some of them are going to be so expensive, no one will use them simply because they're so expensive. And so if you take a systems approach, you can provide them with some boundaries. So we need a system that's going to cost this much, that can produce this much per gallon, that can be used in this kind of environment, which may be very different than another environment. And so if you can provide some boundaries and then bring all the people in that can help with that, not just the innovators, but the environmental impact people, the consumers, to discuss how that's going to work, you'll get a much better product than just sort of giving people no boundaries and saying, we have a problem here and you need to help us fix it. So I think we lack a little structure sometimes when we talk about this, and also a little, we tend to be too siloed and not bring enough people in and get different perspectives. So I'll stop. Thank you all. It was great morning. Enjoyed hearing your conversations.
Thank you, Steve. I like the system, emphasizing the system, which is actually at the core of what we're trying to do in this conference, and resonate well with Jim Jones' keynote yesterday, emphasizing that system approach that we all need to achieve. Gerda, the last word, your last word to the audience.
Thank you very much. I would like to say to Akicha, there is not a big difference between cities, urban areas and rural areas, because in the end, all their interests come together. But please bring them together and have a look at how the Netherlands has organized it. The Netherlands is for 1/3 below sea level, and they needed each other already from the 14th century to fight against water and to work with water. And they have come to democratic board, where all democratic boards, where all users are around the table to find solutions that are creating win-wins and that are putting the costs and the revenues in a balanced way over everyone. Second remark is about water and sanitation as a basic human right. I couldn't agree more. And if my experience in nutrition and food is that if it's becoming a problem, if poor people become poorer and more dependent, and rich people grow richer, then make it a social problem. Two ways you can put it, and you can make it a campaign issue for elections, political elections, or you can create demonstrations. But our best impact is if you ask political candidates, what will be your agenda if we, the people, elect you and trust you the future of our community or our country. Third remark is, thank you for having me. Please connect water more with other issues. in the field of food systems. We cannot miss water, but water cannot miss other parts, health, sanitation, climate, and whatever, in order to find win-wins. And this is indeed a systems approach, as Steve said. So I'm missing you right now at the table, or in the activities of the Food Systems Summit, but please connect. And if you think I can help you to connect, it would be a pleasure.
Thank you, Greta. Thank you all. Very insightful comments, very insightful session. Thank you for the audience sticking around. And I hope this was as interesting and useful as personally I found it. Let me just, in a couple of minutes, try to capture the high-level points that were raised, starting with the educating the investors in the water sector, that looking at the holistic view, at system view of the water sector, with the ecosystem services, with the water quality, with the not only water as a profit, but looking at the business model that was highlighted. There was also a lot of discussion about the disconnect between science and policy. I think this has been a recurring theme and something that needs to be done. I think we need to meet halfway. I think this was a really good mix between academics and policymakers in this session, that we need to do more of these platforms. There was also a discussion about the social element. In fact, I'm glad that it was brought up. John brought it up earlier, in terms of not only the technology that's important, but looking at the social acceptance, social preference, and there's a big discussion that I hope that the Food Summit would look into the consumption behavior. I think we were talking yesterday about food loss and food waste. This dynamic is extremely important, and a lot of it, at least in developing countries, in developed countries, it's about behavior. And we made a distinction between food loss in developing countries versus food waste in developed countries. I think even though the math seems to be equal at about 40%. We did discuss and talk about data. What does it mean, and how do you develop a platform to share data across, and I think across nations, not only across disciplines, but across nations. This seems to be a disconnect that we need to work on all together. There was a global platform that is missing, and I think there was some discussion. I hope this can also be for those of you who will be participating in the Food Summit. I think the data is extremely important. Socializing around the data, what does it mean? Not only sharing that data, but looking into a dialogue across that data, so that decisions can be made using that data. We spent some time also looking at equity. It's not an easy issue, as John corrected me. It's not 500 that I mentioned, it's the 6,000 water utilities in Texas alone, and some of those are for profit. So how do you really bring those on board to win the battle for access? I think we have to work all together, and if it's not as simple. If it's a government-owned utility, the governance is different than a private sector that is looking for profit. I think this issue of equity needs more discussion. We had the discussion about redirecting subsidy and the looking at the reward system and the carrot at stick, and not only be in conflict with the lobbies. In fact, work with the ag lobby, with the farm lobbies, but work effectively for the resilience and livelihood of that sector, rather than looking into benefit of some. We did talk about the rural-urban dynamics. I think that Akisa and Greta has a complementary discussion that this could be brought into light. How can we bring these communities together rather than put an arbitrary divide between the two? Engagement, communication came very strongly, and how do we engage, work all together? But also looking at the last, which is a very important element, is that looking into how do we develop a campaign for bringing a platform, such a platform that we had here together from academia, from the private sector, from the water, from the food, from other sectors, bring them all together to converse and to have a dialogue. So that dialogue came in strong in our discussion. I hope I did some justice to this very rich discussion. I look forward to seeing you in other sessions. Thank you very much. And thank for all the audience that stuck around. I think we didn't lose many, so there must be something that was useful that the audience was hearing. So thank you so much. And then see you in future sessions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you all.
All the best.
Bye.